Hello, everyone. Let's talk a little bit today about adrenal health. This is probably something you've heard of, and it gets quite a bit of attention in the news, at least the holistic news world. But our adrenals, just to remember from anatomy, anatomically, our adrenals sit on the top of our kidneys, little gumdrops. And those adrenals actually produce a number of different hormones. The big ones that we know about, obviously, cortisol, cortisone, but there are other hormones like DHEA, aldosterone, corticosterone, all produced in the adrenal gland. The interesting thing is that some of these hormones can convert into other hormones. Specifically, what we're talking about is ultimately downstream, they can convert into testosterone and into the estrogens. The key thing to understand, though, with the adrenals are that they serve a major function in the body, one that we don't always quite understand. Cortisol and cortisone, these are often referred to as our stress hormones. The way that I explain it to patients, though, is not that they are stress hormones, that they are stress-induced hormones, meaning that when our body is under more stress, under more duress, we are going to produce higher levels of cortisol, at least temporarily. And why do I say temporarily? Because over time, if our body, if our brain perceives us to be in a situation where we are in a stressful or anxious state, our body will produce and release more cortisol. But that can only last for so long. So in so doing, we may produce cortisol over 3, 6 months, a year at higher rates than we did for the years preceding. And this can help us actually. So we think about cortisol as this negative thing that our body does, right? In fact, most people and most doctors equate stress and cortisol together as if our body produces cortisol and then we go through stress, right? But really the reverse is true. Our body under stress, under duress, will produce more cortisol. Why? Because cortisol is an anti-inflammatory hormone. It's a hormone to help regulate things. So we get all of this attention towards cortisol being too high. This is a hyper-adrenal person, somebody who's producing cortisol at high levels. Really, from a medical standpoint, if somebody is pathologically producing cortisol, meaning the body is not intending to produce it or release it in the way that it is, that is typically an autoimmune disease called Cushing's disease, where the face will be rounded. We may develop a little hump on our neck. We definitely develop more fat around our abdomen. So cortisol doesn't typically just go up for no reason, unless we have something pathological like Cushing's disease. In fact, cortisol goes up because our body is producing it in a response to the stress that we are going through. So I've talked about this a little bit in the past, but in our long ancestry, our long time back when we were surviving as a species in the woods, living out of caves, this cortisol response was super important because we needed to escape whatever the creature or whatever the tribe or whatever was coming after us. And what we did was produce it for a short period of time, and then we would go back into a relaxed state. But now in our current society, where we are hit with 24-hour news, constant stress about work, constant stress about what's going to happen with the kids going to college, and the non-stop kind of overwhelming deluge of events that can increase our internal angst and stress, our body starts to produce cortisol at high levels and at inopportune times. And this is one of the direct reasons that we see such a large increase in insomnia in our patients and high levels of anxiety, especially in our teenagers, right? So we can actually see that with the increase in social media and the ability for our teenagers, our kids to access social media, we see that anxiety has become rampant in our teenager and tweenager community right? So these kids are feeling the brunt of this nonstop anxiety, but so are adults. A constant news cycle, as I said, sometimes stressors at work and so forth. So our adrenals really, even though they are these two little tiny, two tiny glands, they are taking a large brunt of this stress, and they are doing what they can to help us by producing cortisol. But high levels of cortisol, we know, do a couple different things. They increase our heart rate, right? They have an effect right on the kidneys, which actually can increase heart rate. They actually increase blood sugar, meaning they cause the body to secrete more glucose into the bloodstream. Why? Because we need glucose. We need glucose to get in the cell so that the cells can do their action. Our musculoskeletal system can come into action, and we can actually get away from whatever that stressor is. Unfortunately, that stressor is often us, or is often something that we are involved in, our job, our relationship, what our habits are, watching the news all the time, worrying about our kids, worrying about our friends, our neighbors, our family. So that stress that is being produced, that cortisol that is being released, is actually being released because of something going on up here, not something going on out there always. Okay, so now that we know that, what do we do about it, right? What do we do about it? Well, really the answer isn't so simple, but there are some simple things that we can do. There are definitely things that we can use and we can remember when we are trying to reduce our own stress. Number one is, let's not actually really talk about reducing stress, because that doesn't happen. We have to manage it better. We have to manage it differently. We have to change our mindset, the way that we see, the way that we think about these things that come at us. I say this because as we get older, we have this idea that, hey, when I get into my 50s or when I get into my mid 50s and my kids are grown up, my stress level is going to come way down. And what I see is that's absolutely not true. When I get to retirement and I don't have to work, my stress level is going to come way down. Not true. Okay. When my spouse, who's sick passes, my stress level is going to go way down. And that doesn't happen. Stress just moves in a different direction. So really, it's about managing the stress. So how do we do that? Well, simple things in our life, simple things that we sometimes take for granted, right? Simple things like quieting the mind, turning our TV off, turning the radio off, turning podcasts off, even turning music off, and just sitting there and allowing the body to process what it needs to. Level up from that is actually meditating, okay? Meditating, which is not just sitting in the quiet, but trying to, as things come into our space, into our mental space, we try to take them, look at them, and release them. This can take years to a lifetime to actually perfect, and I would even venture to say that even after a lifetime, people may not meditate so-called perfectly, but really it's the act of doing this. It's the act of trying to quiet the mind down, trying to take out things that keep appearing. In fact, in meditation, what we find is not simply that these things appear because we consciously put them there, but actually things bubble up from the subconscious, from the unconscious. They bubble up into our conscious mind. And we then have a choice, not before then. We don't have a choice on what appears in our conscious, but we do have a choice of what we can do with it. We can ruminate on it. We can sit there and think about how we are going to fix whatever that problem is. We can, think about, how it's affected us in some negative way. We can blame, we can do any of that, or we can take it, look at it, and let it go, right? So not easy, but important to do. This is how we are going to manage stress, not reduce it, but manage it. What else can we do? Well, we've already talked about being quiet. We've talked about meditation. What about simple things like walking? Okay, walking, which I love to give my patients this as something. I want you to walk for 30 minutes each day. Okay, 30 minutes every day I want you to walk. Where to? Doesn't matter. Okay, what are some of the rules of walking? Number one rule is just do it. Just do it. Just start walking. However it is, however slow, however you need to do it with headphones, with music, whatever, getting your partner, whatever. So rule number one is just do it. But rule number two is when we can start to take out some of the things that distract us from actually centering ourselves and being at peace. What does that mean? Well, often I tell patients that I want them to take the headphones out, stop the music, stop the podcasts, maybe even start to do this on your own. So you quietly walk through the world. Yes, you'll be thinking. Yes, things are going to come at you, just like in meditation. Remember, we don't have control of what the subconscious bubbles up. We don't have control of that. But what we have control of is what we do with it. When we're listening to a podcast, when we're listening to music, when we're talking to a friend, great. All of those are great. They're ways of relieving stress as well. But they distract us from what our center point is. Okay? So that's another thing that we can do to manage it. The other things are simple things that we should all be including more in our life, right? Sleep. Sleep is such an essential piece. Some of us, including myself, often don't get adequate levels of sleep. So really prepping ourselves to get into bed earlier and setting a specific time we will get into bed and trying to stick to that and trying to stick to a specific wake-up time. Okay, whether or not we sleep well throughout the night, we get up, we have to pee, whatever it might be, that's okay. But just setting that time frame. I'm going to be in bed at 10 with a hope that I'll be in bed asleep by 10:30, and I'm going to get up at 6:30 regardless of how I feel. Okay. Other things are really managing our stress through diet, right? So focusing on foods that we know are nourishing, right? Lean meats, proteins, complex carbohydrates, fats, all these things. What doesn't do it? Sugar and simple carbohydrates, right? So simple, right? We all know this, but simple sugars and simple carbohydrates will cause our blood sugar to go up. We might feel good. It goes down. We feel terrible or tired. We go up and down and up and down. It's a roller coaster. So how do we manage our stress when our blood sugar is not consistently level? Also means having meals at consistent times. Whether you do intermittent fasting, where you'll have a 16-hour fasting window and an 8-hour eating window, or a typical, normal 14-hour eating window where we have a breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Having consistent times when our body knows that we're going to eat. Also, focusing on foods that we know at the right time are the right thing for our body. Most of us, that means higher intake of proteins and fats in the morning and afternoon. And sometimes it means a little bit higher carbohydrates at dinner. Why? Carbohydrates actually increase some of the hormones and neurotransmitters that can help us with sleep. So these are just some of the ways that we can start to think about managing stress. The other things that I love to talk to people about are fasting, but not just food fasting. I'm talking about news fasting, right? So we know that news and information comes at us at such a rapid rate, and we're just trying to absorb everything that comes through it, whether that's watching the nightly news or being on our phone. We have an app that shows our news, and every time a big news event pops up, it just rings, dings up us. And so really thinking about removing those news apps, turning off those alarms for when some big news event happens. I promise you that if something big happens, your neighbors, your friends will be telling you about it anyways. The other thing is really thinking about who we are letting in our inner circle. This is so important. This is so important because who we allow in here affects how we think up here. So if we allow people into our inner circle, into our heart, into our family, and they don't serve us, they don't provide positivity and energy and help and support and love and all these things, but instead take some piece from us or leave us with some negative residue, those are things and people that we might want to limit our time with. Doesn't mean give up on friends who are negative or going through a difficult time, not at all. It just means we have to be protective of that space. We have to be protective of our inner space, our inner family, those people who most care about us, who most help us, and we can then help them. Remember, a relationship needs to be a push and pull. It needs to be a two-way street. It doesn't always happen all the time. Sometimes you're going through something difficult and you're leaning on a friend a lot, but it needs to also have some reciprocal aspect to it, okay? So that's another way that we can help manage our stress as it comes in. So let's just think about those things before we finish. First of all, finding quiet time and space where we can think. And that doesn't even mean meditating. That just means turning off all the distractions and allowing things to come up as they would naturally. A step above that is doing actual meditation, okay? Maybe 10, 20 minutes, 30 minutes a day of actively allowing things to come in a quiet space, quiet environment, and taking them, looking at them, and trying to let them go, okay? Thirdly, we want to really help regulate our sleep, making sure we get up at the same time, go to sleep at the same time, have really good sleep patterns, right? Fourthly, doing physical activity like walking especially, and trying to do that with as little distraction as possible, right? So little distraction meaning let's take out the headphones, let's try to do some of that walking by ourselves, not all of it, but some of it by ourselves. Let's allow whatever is going to come in during that process to come in and allow us to sort through it right then and there. Fifthly, we want to think about news fasting and really removing those things in our phone, in our electronic media that are going to stimulate our brain, that are going to produce more cortisol, more anxiety, because there's some external factor that we may not have control over. Again, that doesn't mean completely cutting out news and becoming, detached from it, but it does mean not focusing all of our attention. And one of the things that you need to do is turn off all of those alerts that happen every time a news event happens, okay? This is a great way of reducing this angst that will then produce more cortisol. And then the last thing is being protective, right, of our internal environment, to our inner circle, those people that we most care about, including ourselves. So not allowing people that leave us with a negative residue, those people that always we're having to prop up and support emotionally and physically or monetarily, not allowing those in all the time, right? Really creating definitive boundaries that they understand and that we can stick to, so that those people know, and we also know, that there is a protective barrier here, and we're going to give some of that away, but it can't simply be us constantly allowing people in and giving them emotional, physical, monetary support. Anyhow, I hope that helps. I know we got a little off track on talking about cortisol. Remember, cortisol, though, to wrap things up, is one of our major hormones of the adrenal gland. And I want you to think about cortisol a little differently, that it's not simply just produced and for no reason, and then that causes stress. Usually it's our own stress, our own things going on that then cause the body to have to increase the release of this hormone. Anyhow, I'll see you again next time.